The Sunrisers Eastern Cape had no form to speak of as they entered the knockout phase of the SA20, winning only once in their last 5 round-robin matches. They lost twice in the round-robins to their semi-final opponents, the Joburg Super Kings, and the smart money suggested that that would happen a third time in the semi-final. It didn't. The Sunrisers won their semi and they won the final. This is their miraculous story. Welcome to the Luke Alfred Show. I have 30 years of experience on the front lines of sports journalism, covering some of the biggest games in cricket, rugby, the FIFA World Cup and even the Olympic Games. Come and join me as we learn about the greatest sports stories you've never heard. I'm Luke Alfred and welcome to the show. Shortly before the Sunrisers Eastern Cape's SA20 campaign got underway in January, their coach Adrian Birrell took the team off to his farm for some bonding and a barbecue, what we South Africans like to call with undisguised relish, a braai. Birrell bought 8 Cake Farm. 8 Cake is spelt U-I-T-K-I-J-K in the Dutch manner, rather than the Afrikaans way back in 1997, and on it he farms cattle and bees. 8 Cake is a big spread, approximately 60 kilometers from St. George's Park, and as well as bees and beef, Birrell's place contains its fair share of wild animals: giraffe and zebra, kudu, duiker and impala. It's a nice combination of the wild and the domestic, the raw and the cooked, a good environment in which to pose some questions and try and answer them around a campfire in the big African night. Birrell turned 62 last December. He is of an age where consoling illusion is less comforting than it once was, having been overtaken by the stealthy ravages of receding hairlines and dodgy knees, and all the other interesting things that make midlife so existentially slippery. Nowadays, for example, he's only too happy to refer to himself as, quote, not a very good cricketer, from his days playing alongside Kepler Wessels and Mark Rushmere at what was once Eastern Province, something he might not have done 10 or even 15 years ago. As befits a man of few illusions, he is prepared to dispense with the management jargon and the cute vocabularies and get down to where, to coin a phrase, the plough hits the soil. The inaugural SA20 started on January 10, and in the spirit of plough hitting soil, Birrell spent some of his Christmas pondering the issue of how to create unity, or at least the fiction of unity, in a team who had never played together. He looked at the Sunrisers logo, a bird of prey with wings spread wide, backed by a small rising sun, and realized he could create a team culture around the theme of fire. Quote, as part of our teamwork exercise in the bush, I told him that the heat of the fire was similar to the heart of the team, Birrell told me in an interview before flying off to 7 months with Hampshire at the beginning of March. All of you add fuel to the fire, he went on. And when the fire dies down to embers, you need to blow on the coals and revitalize it and get it going again. In Africa, there are rocks around a fire. Those rocks stand for discipline and stability. In order for this to be a functioning team, we'll need some of you to be rocks. Birrell has developed similar ideas over the years, but this one was customized to speak to the Sunrisers players in a way that made the most of both the Sunrisers ethic and what 8 Cake Farm had to offer. Birrell made sure that his ideas, cheesy as they may sound out of context, had applicability throughout the Sunrisers SA20 campaign. He was big on the language of fire throughout, stressing as often as the occasion allowed the values that are important to him as a coach: authenticity, teamwork, and strategic coalitions. At the beginning of their campaign, all this fire talk might have seemed like so much hot air. The Sunrisers lost their opening 2 matches to the Pretoria Capitals by 23 runs and 37 runs respectively, and went into a similar home and away encounter with the Mumbai Indians Cape Town, one of the tournament's early favourites, desperately seeking the elusive fire within. Injuries forced changes, with Tom Abel, who made a handy 40 not out in the chase against the Capitals in Game 1, forced out of Game 3 with a groin-cum-hamstring injury. His place was taken by Adam Rossington, playing in his first game of the competition, who also took the gloves from Jordan Cox, with Roelof van der Merwe coming in for Mason Crane, the leg spinner, who Burrell knew well from his days with Hampshire. There's a story behind the preponderance of English players in the Sunrisers lineup. Burrell says that they spent more money than they'd budgeted for in the first phase of the auction, presumably on players like Aidan Markram and Tristan Stubbs, although he mentions neither by name, so needed to pick up what might euphemistically be called bargains as the auction progressed. Burrell knew Rossington from his stint as England under-19 coach, and Fuller is a peripatetic individual who landed up at Hampshire. Burrell played with Bryden Cass's old man, the tearaway James at Eastern Province. Cox he is familiar with from nearby Kent. Each brought something unique, and crucially, they didn't break a bank that didn't have much left in it. As luck would have it, Rossington didn't leave much of a footprint on Game 3 against MI Cape Town, making a duck. Neither did Roelof van der Merwe, playing in his first game, who went wicketless in his 3 overs, but the Sunrisers opened their account at home, winning by 4 wickets with 3 balls to spare. Although Rossington and van der Merwe played more of a role in the return leg at Newlands, van der Merwe was on a hat-trick at one point. The Sunrisers found themselves in murky water, chasing MI Cape Town's 171 for 6, thanks in the main to Ryan Rickleton's 46 and Grant Roelofsen's 56. With Markram fourth out for a 14-ball 12, bowled by Rashid Khan, so the Sunrisers plunged to 57 for 4 in their chase. The Sunrisers promptly called a strategic timeout, Burrell telling the troops that, more than anything else, they now needed to concentrate on building a partnership or partnerships. In the language of the Sunrisers, they needed to add logs to the fire. The equation at this stage was not in their favour. They needed 115 runs in 71 balls against an attack that contained Rashid Khan, KG Rabada, Sam Curran and Jofra Archer. Burrell's talk around the campfire at 8 Cake Farm was now being stress-tested. If they lost here, it would have been 1 out of 4. It was now or never. Burrell, 62 years old, and a man for whom consoling illusions had long since ceased to matter, was facing the distinct possibility that the Sunrisers wouldn't make the playoffs. Here was a moment as big and pregnant as the African night. Television makes fools of us all. It tags with our memories and gives us a different view of the game, so we tend to remember the next passage of play as being Marco Jansen versus Khan, the former clobbering the leg spinner to all corners of Newlands, but it wasn't quite like that. After Markram actually came Cox, batting at 6 after his fine catching display in the field, one of those lads who Burrell and others at the Sunrisers had bought after they broke the bank to join the effervescent Stubbs and his 2 wide eyes. They followed the advice given in the strategic timeout to the letter. In 4 overs, the 2 scored 34 runs, 8.5 runs an over, before Stubbs went to a good running catch by Rickleton in the deep off Curran. In their reply against MI Cape Town, the Sunrisers made losing a wicket off the first ball of the over a habit. Markram went off the first ball of the over, Stubbs went off the first ball of the over, and so too did Cox, being run out off the first ball of the 14th over because, although making his ground, he failed to ground his bat. His run-out brought Cass to join Jansen. With Cox's run-out, the Sunrisers were 101 for 6, and the chase could now lead easily to miscalculation, even panic. Campfire heart-to-hearts in the Eastern Cape bush with fire as the theme were looking an awfully long way away. That, of course, was to discount the role of Jansen. His assault on Khan in the 16th over split the match wide open, like a panga through a watermelon, and although they still needed to score 10 runs and over for the last 4 overs, the innings was suddenly being powered by the rocket fuel of self-belief. Here, Burrell called the second timeout of the Sunrisers' innings. When asked about it, he said that it was important that Jansen and Cass be aware of who in the MI Cape Town attack still had overs to bowl. Archer 1, Rabada 1, Curran 1, and possibly 1 from either George Linder or O'Dean Smith. With the batters prepared for all eventualities, they could make better decisions. Hadn't Burrell talked in the bush about strategic coalitions? The second strategic timeout had the desired effect because although Kaas was caught in the deep and Janssen was bowled by Rabada, the Sunrisers still managed to haul themselves across the line like a comrades marathon runner shortly before cut-off. Van der Merwe and Sisanda Magala were at the crease when Curran bowled a no ball, and so the Sunrisers snuck home with 3 balls remaining. Down the road in Paarl in match 5, Magala played his part again. The Paarl Royals batted first on a tricky deck, and Magala snuffled Jos Butler, taking 1 for 15 in his 4 to make the Royals look very ordinary. Van der Merwe and Markram both extracted turn to pick up 2 wickets apiece, as the Sunrisers restricted the Royals to 127 for 7, batting first. Again, the Sunrisers tried a different opening combination. Jordan Herman visited 8 Cake with a broken toe at the beginning of the campaign, and by the time of the match against the Royals, the toe had mended. Burrell told me that ideally the Sunrisers wanted to open with Herman in the first game, but the toe injury necessitated a rejigging, with JJ Smuts and Sarel Ervia the preferred early opening combination. But here Herman was, playing in his first outing of the season. He took advantage of his opportunity to score a breezy 43, partnering with Markram, 23, for a 57-run third-wicket stand, the biggest of the match and the one that definitively put the Sunrisers on the road to victory, their third in as many matches. At halfway in the competition, they were up and rolling. Having lost their opening 2 against the Capitals, they'd now won 3 out of 5. The Sunrisers' next 3 matches were all at home at St George's Park, so Burrell and Markram's thoughts turned naturally to possibly nailing down a semi-final place early. They could set up base and not have to deal with the schlep of travel. Yes, they were inconvenienced by Otniel Bartman's injury, but here was an opportunity to play where they always enjoyed playing, in front of St George's Park's brass band. At 62 for 6 against the Joburg Super Kings in match 6, the Sunrisers didn't give their loyal and slightly long-suffering fans very much to sing about. Aaron Pangiso bowled one of the spells of the competition to take 4 for 20, and being bowled out for 127 didn't inspire much confidence at halfway. Predictably, the Sunrisers lost, although the Super Kings only did it with 2 balls to spare with 5 wickets standing. 3 won, 3 lost, meaning the Sunrisers' campaign was still on the proverbial knife edge. Burrell never intended his discussion at 8 Cake Farm before the Sunrisers started off their big adventure to be left behind like smouldering campfire ashes. He intended for it to be revisited, to have applicability throughout the season, depending on circumstance. With the loss to the Joburg Super Kings, he felt the need to add a little fuel to the fire. The Sunrisers had been bowled out with 8 balls to spare, always an ominous sign, and Burrell was concerned their reserves of energy might be draining away. They had 2 matches at home before the recess for the 3 ODIs against England. If they could win both, they'd sleep easy in the recess. Burrell shouldn't have worried because in match 19 it was the Durban Supergiants who looked bereft of energy. At his best, Rossington is a carelessly gifted striker of a cricket ball, and he came good against the Supergiants in scoring 72 in 30 balls, with 10 fours and 4 sixes. Herman was the junior partner in an opening stand of 101 as he went on to score 59, the innings clipping along like a felt fire to reach 210 for 2, both Markram and Stubbs contributing. With Crane back, the Sunrisers used 4 spinners, Crane himself, Markram, Smuts and Van der Merwe, in their defence of one of the biggest totals of the competition so far. Van der Merwe found his mojo as he ripped the Giants' heart out like a hero in a fairy tale, accounting for the dangerous Quinny de Kock and Heinrich Klaassen, as well as Kyle Mayers, Jason Holder and Dwayne Pretorius, to take 6 for 20. Game over. Burrell was a spinner himself. Many years ago I remember him telling me that he had to fight long and hard for the right to bowl his leggies. These differences of opinion mainly took place with Wessels, never a man for off-the-cuff brio or cavalier experimentation when the well-trodden path would do. Burrell could bat a bit too, despite his protestations to the contrary, but I always sensed that he reserved a special place in his heart for the spinner, particularly the leg spinner. Spin might have spun against the Durban Supergiants, but spin was of little consequence next, because the Sunrisers simply scored too few runs to defend in their next match against the Royals. Smuts top scored for them as they batted first with 66, but they could only manage 130, and this at their favoured St George's Park in front of the band. Butler was on song for the visitors with 51, and David Miller thumped 4 sixes in his 37 not out at the back end to consign the Sunrisers to a 5-wicket loss. They had now played 8 and won 4 and lost 4. Fireside heart to hearts notwithstanding, what made the Sunrisers win in the competition so remarkable was that their campaign was without appreciable pattern until the knockouts. 2 losses were followed by 3 wins, but it exploded thereafter because they lost in Game 6, won in Game 7 and lost in Game 8, Games 6 to 8 all being played at home, which might have been seen to confer some sort of advantage. Burrell is very possibly the world's least ironic man, but I couldn't help but grin inwardly when, after asking him if the recess, after Game 8 remember, was to his team's advantage, he replied that yes it was. He added by way of explanation that he felt their energy was slightly better after the break, but the irony was that this newfound fire in the Sunrisers' collective belly found no expression in their results, just the opposite in fact. Their 9th match, away to the Durban Supergiants at Kingsmead, was rained out, Rossington going great guns when the heavens opened, incidentally, but they lost in their final game, this time to Faf du Plessis 92 in their match at the Wanderers against the Joburg Super Kings, the very team they'd meet in their semi-final up the road at Centurion in a couple of days' time. Having lost 2 out of 3 with 1 abandonment, the Sunrisers had absolutely no momentum whatsoever going into the knockouts. They'd not only lost recently to their opponents in the semi-final, but had lost to the self-same team earlier in the competition. They'd also lost twice to the team pretty much everyone was predicting would win the competition, the Pretoria Capitals, who by the time the Sunrisers played their semi-final had beaten the Paarl Royals in the first of them. Here it was complacently assumed that the Capitals, with 7 wins out of 10 trundling along to the knockouts, already had one hand on the trophy. The Sunrisers' semi-final victory over the Joburg Super Kings is best remembered for Markram's 58-ball 100, as he went to 3 figures with the 6th of his sixes. Herman, he of the broken toe, played his part for 48, as the two put on a 99-run partnership in 11 odd overs, as the Sunrisers posted 213 for 5. It wasn't a day for the bowlers. Nandre Berger went for 50 and Romario Shepherd conceded 54. Thanks for coming, boys. The Joburg Super Kings chase started badly, Du Plessis holing out to Herman on the deep square fence for a duck. Gerald Coetzee, who had bowled a 9-ball final over that saw coach Stephen Fleming dash from the dugout in a strop, was promoted up the order as a pinch hitter, but it was not Coetzee's day. He used up valuable balls, and although Reza Hendricks was his customary cool self for an accomplished 96, the Kings couldn't quite manage to pass the Sunrisers' total, falling short by 14 runs. Burrell told me with some pride that the only time the Sunrisers played the same side twice was in the semi-final and the final. With a top 5 of Rossington, Bavuma, Herman, Markram and Stubbs, it was a very different side to the early side of Smuts, Ervia, Fuller, Abel and Crane. Importantly, it was a side that worked, finding itself in the white-hot fire of T20 cricket. The Capitals batted first in the final, no one scoring less than 3 and no one scoring more than 21, and the Capitals hobbled to 135. The innings was always on crutches, thanks in the main to Vandermerwe's 4 pegs, but the wickets were spread. Bartman took 2, Magala took 2, and Markram and Janssen 1 apiece. The chase was a doddle. Rossington came into his own with a pugnacious 57, and Herman and Markram contributed with 20s. The Sunrisers, probably the competition's most inconsistent team, winning the final with 22 balls to spare. Looking back on the campaign, Birrell was his phlegmatic Eastern Cape best. Quote, "We were lucky in that players didn't get too precious about being left out," he says. "To some extent it was horses for courses. We wanted everyone in that squad to have a hand on the trophy, not just the guys who played for us in the final." A farmer, with his mildly sardonic air of detachment, Birrell doesn't inflame the passions as, say, a Mark Boucher or Justin Langer does. But his recent record is quite astounding. Either with Hampshire, Boland or the Paarl Rocks, he has won the Vitality Blast, with Hampshire in 2022, the South African domestic T20 with Boland in the 2021-22 season, or the second edition of the Mzansi Super League with the Rocks in 2019. And that's not counting his semi-finals in the self-same T20 competitions. Clearly some coaches are firefighters, while others are firelighters. No prizes for guessing where the man from 8 Cake Farm stands.